Okay. Okay, everybody, welcome to this webinar with the Human Trafficking Legal Center and the Freedom Network. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to come in and to join us. And we'll start in just a minute or two. Okay, good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. My name is Martina Vandenberg, and I am the president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center in Washington, D.C., and it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the Survivor Reentry Project. Our two speakers today are probably some of the most highly qualified people to speak about this in the country. First, Jessica Kitson, who is a senior managing attorney at the Volunteer Lawyers for Justice Project in New Jersey. And Melissa Smith, who is a leader in the survivor movement and has extensive experience with working with criminal record relief issues. So this webinar, as you know, is co-sponsored by the Human Trafficking Legal Center and the Freedom Network. Human Trafficking Legal Center seeks pro bono representation for human trafficking survivors all around the country. And I'm going to hand off to Amanda Norwood from the Freedom Network, who will introduce a little bit about the Freedom Network, and then we'll go straight into the substance. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Norwood at Freedom Network USA. We're a national network. We currently have 80 members, a combination of organizations and individuals, and we work to advance a human rights-based approach to addressing human trafficking throughout the U.S. So we provide training and technical assistance to the field, and we also do federal advocacy work to help improve policies and legislation for human trafficking survivors.
Terrific. Thank you, Amanda. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand this off to Jessica, who will put up her slides. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to either put your question in the Q&A box or the chat box, or raise your hand. So with that, I will hand off to Jessica and Melissa to cover criminal records relief. Yes.
Thanks, Martina. Sorry, it's saying that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
So oh, okay.
I think I need to share my screen.
Let me see how I can do that. Okay, I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to do it now.
Great. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. I am thrilled to be here talking with all of you. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. I'm especially excited to be here with Melissa, who was the first survivor that I got to work with on criminal record clearing in New Jersey. And so I'm thrilled that she's going to tell you a bit about her journey and give some thoughts about working with survivors across the country to get some of the relief to which they're entitled. So learn how to work my PowerPoint. Again, this is Melissa. I'm Jessica. I want to start by asking if you could go in the chat and tell us a little bit about who is with us today, maybe what your role is. Are you a case manager? Are you an attorney? Are you a survivor? So that we have a sense of who's with us and what your familiarity is already with criminal record clearing. And so if you want to go in the chat and put that there, give everybody a chance to get to know who's with us today. And with that, I want to give a little bit of background. I'm going to turn things over to Melissa pretty quickly, because I think that all of this is really, the information is best given with a background directly from someone who's been impacted by this work. But just to start, I want to lay the groundwork on why we're here and how we got here. So a National Survivor Network survey in 2016 showed that 91% of respondents reported that they had been arrested. And over 50% reported that every single arrest on their record was in fact trafficking related. 42% of those also said that they were arrested as minors, and 40% reported being arrested more than 9 times. 60% reported being arrested for crimes other than prostitution, which is going to be really important as we get into the dynamics of what the different laws look like across the country, and really what the impacts are for sex trafficking survivors versus labor trafficking survivors. I think that there has been a lot of attention paid to sex trafficking when it comes to criminal record relief. And a lot of laws, in fact, have been written specifically geared towards sex trafficking, when in fact we know that it is relief that labor trafficking survivors also need. And what is the impact of these records, right? So it can affect a survivor's ability to gain employment. Melissa's certainly going to talk to you about that in her case in a little bit. It will affect clients' ability to get housing, education, benefits, and financial assistance. It certainly can have an impact on family stability. And especially, and in recent years, this has been an even bigger problem than before. It has tremendous impact on immigration relief or adjustment of status for foreign national clients. And so the need for this relief has been incredible. And yet we are still in the relatively early stages of seeing this come across the country. Here's a quote that I like to point to, talking about, you know, I think when we think about employment impact for clients, the thinking is that folks are applying for jobs and getting denied. And what we also see is folks are opting out of even pursuing opportunities because they understand what the impact potentially can be. And that has even more dire consequences than folks who are being denied outright in many instances. So in 2009, this is what our sad little United States map looked like. New York became the first state in the country to pass vacatur relief, vacatur criminal record relief. I use those two interchangeably. We'll get into the specifics of what vacatur means in a little bit. But it became the first state in the country to allow survivors to undo convictions on their record that related to trafficking. And while that was huge, you might think, well, sure, but that only works for folks who have convictions in New York. And so this is what this looks like today. And I can tell you that I did a presentation with Melissa a few months ago, and the map has changed even since the one we used then, because Georgia has now been shaded into our darker color of orange here. So this is really a tremendous victory for advocates across the country who have worked tirelessly to ensure that survivors have the opportunity to clear their record. It is not perfect, right? So all of these states do not have the same law. They vary widely and wildly in terms of what relief is available and what procedures folks have to go through in order to access the relief. But there is some ability to vacate and expunge charges for trafficking related offenses in all of the darker shaded states on here. You'll see that we still have some work to do. Virginia needs to get its act together. We've got to get the relief there. But we've come a very, very long way. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Melissa. So in a little, when Melissa's done, I'll go back and I'm going to talk about what the process looks like, generally speaking, things that you want to think about when you are working with survivors. But what I think Melissa's going to do is she's going to tell us the very real impact that these laws can have for folks who are faced with criminal records after having endured trafficking. And so Melissa came to Volunteer Lawyers for Justice, was referred to us in 2014, and thus began our journey of filing the first petition in the state of New Jersey under New Jersey's law. And so she's absolutely one of my favorite people, and I'm going to shut up and let you hear directly from her about what this has been like on her end.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa. Wow, 2014. It's so long ago, it seems, right? My name is Melissa, like I said. I started out, I didn't start out with Jessica and Volunteer Lawyers Justice. What am I saying? Volunteer Justice.
No, you got it. You had it right.
Okay. Volunteer. Yeah, right. I'm like, what? Because I'm trying to think of the other one as I'm speaking. So I started out with a firm in New York, but I didn't really like that quote that Jessica had put up about I know they're going to fingerprint me. So why would I want to relive all that all over again? So basically that's what happened to me. Perfect example. I'll start in the beginning. I was a single mother at the early age of 19. The father wanted nothing to do with the child, so I fell into the no money, no job, no where to turn. I didn't have family. My mother kicked me out when I was 15 years old. She said that I was a bad child. My brother took me in and then had me go to school in New York away from my mother, which was a good thing because she was very abusive. I had my son. Like I said, I had nowhere to turn. I started a life of drugs and just really bad things were happening all over the place. And I wound up hanging out with the wrong people, getting messed up in the wrong things, and I became a heroin addict. I was a heroin addict for 2 years. And then one day I didn't have what I needed to have, and my little boy came to me and asked me to take my medicine so that I could play with him. And that broke my heart. So I knew right then and there that I needed help from that situation. So I turned myself into my probation officer. I was on probation for a crime that I did not commit. It was a crime that was committed by someone else. But because I knew of the crime and I did not tell on that person, I was convicted with the crime as if I had committed the burglary itself. So I was on probation, burglary third, a child on my own, a heroin addict, and nowhere to turn. I went to my probation officer. I told her what was going on. She took me here to where I live now in the Hudson Valley to a amazing program that is no longer here, unfortunately. I got clean from the heroin, but she violated me and put me in jail. And that's where I met my trafficker. Where most girls meet their traffickers is what I'm learning, because we're in jail, we have no one to talk to, nowhere to turn. So they prey on us, and they have girls in there that prey on us. And that's exactly what happened. So I met my trafficker when I was in jail. He put money on my books. He talked up the life, telling me he had attorneys and he was going to help me get my son back, and I didn't have to worry. And it was me and him, and we would make it happen. And sure enough, the day of my release, he picked me up in the white Escalade that he said that I, was my car and it was going to be mine. And it sure enough was, but it came with a price. But so long story short, I was trafficked up and down the East Coast, doing things that weren't just the normal trafficking, like the crimes you would think would be solicitation or being caught with your pants down, I guess you could say. But I didn't have a lot of those. I had mostly trespassing charges and criminal trespassing charges, and I had one prostitution charge, which was a felony, which is why I met Jessica. All my charges just kept piling up. I saw my son a heck of a lot less, which is when I decided enough was enough and I had to go. I didn't see my son. He wasn't holding up his end of the bargain. So it was time for me to leave and go get my son back on my own. I saved up money. I sent it home to a gentleman who said he was going to help me get out of that life. I believed him, and he did exactly what he said. He got me out of that life, but with consequence, of course. I went from one trafficker to being a personal prostitute for someone who got me out of that life. I got out of the life. I got a job. It was a telemarketing job. Of course, they don't background check. They don't fingerprint. They don't do any of those things. I was approached by the FBI to help put my trafficker away. They said that he was going to go away for a long time. They asked if I would help them. And I said, of course. I spoke at Mr. Tompkins' hearing. The judge then put him away for the maximum time. And I was told at that time by, as we all know, Governor Chris Christie. He was the state's attorney at the time, or the attorney general, right? And prosecutor or something. And
He was the
his,
U.S. attorney for the state.
yeah, that was his case. So yeah, so that was his big break. And he told us all that, you know, we would have our tattoos removed, any type of counseling that we needed, you know, our criminal records would be sealed. No one would ever know. You know, we had nothing to worry about. If we helped him and New Jersey put Mr. Tompkins away, no one would ever know. Well, that wasn't the case. Years had gone by. I had started my family. I had my oldest daughter. She's now 8 years old. And I was pregnant with my youngest, and I was working at a job that I loved. I loved to be with children. And I thought I could go and be a bus monitor for the Beacon City School District and work my way up and actually work in the schools and become a teacher, which is what I wanted to do my whole life. Well, I got fingerprinted, and when I got fingerprinted, that's when I was told that I had all these charges of trespassing and prostitution, and it was just a laundry list of things, and I was floored. Like I couldn't believe it, because I was told that that wasn't going to happen. So of course, there I am having to explain something that I thought I would never have to speak about again. I never thought in a million years that I would have to even tell anyone, that I thought it would be my secret to take to my grave with me, with the people that didn't know already. So of course, it kind of angered me a little, and that kind of fuels my fire sometimes. And that it made me say, hey, Melissa, what are you doing here? Like, put your best foot forward. Let's get it done. So I contacted Urban Justice Society, right? The Urban Justice Society. Robin Richardson. She was helping one of my other friends, wife-in-laws from the stable. And she said that she would help me. And she did. And she introduced me to Jessica, and that's when this whole journey began. But if it wasn't for me feeling comfortable and what's the word I'm looking for? Not comfortable, but I felt like they were really trying to help me. It wasn't like Chris Christie. They weren't lying to me. They weren't saying that they were going to help me and not. So I felt very comfortable. Excuse me one second. You have to take that out.
And I'm just going to jump in here and say that, you know, one of the things that happened when Melissa came to us was, right, we were still figuring out how New Jersey's law was going to look. And so there was a lot of unknowns, and Melissa, you know, we had to tell Melissa from day one that, you know, we were going to jump in and try and figure this all out, but that it was new terrain for all of us also. And she just, from the minute we got there, said, not only was she up for, you know, sort of being that first test case to see how it would all work, but that she actually really wanted us to take our time and do it right, not for her, but so that other people would be able to follow after her, and that we would have good procedures in place. So from the very beginning, Melissa was really thinking about how this would impact the lives of other survivors. Melissa, you're muted, just so, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sorry about that. My kids
That's
have
okay.
school home with me all day. I'm so sorry.
I'm gonna guess everybody on the Zoom, for the most part, can relate to that.
Yeah. So I met Jessica, and oh my gosh, Jeff. And I drove to Jersey, and I sat in the parking lot, and I was scared. I didn't want to get out of the car. Like I didn't know how these people
I'm
were.
putting up a picture of Jeff for you there, Melissa.
Oh, isn't he cute? Little baldy. Anyway, sorry. But I didn't know how they were going to look at me, how they were going to treat me, or what they were going to think of me, you know? Like I don't know. I didn't trust that the situation was going to work as well as it did. But I'm glad that I did actually go inside and sit down and speak with Jessica and Jeffrey. They made me feel so comfortable and so at home. I think I went through 2 boxes of tissues because everything they said, they did. Everything they offered, everything they, said was going to happen, happened. They said, it might not go the first time. We might have to reword a couple of things, but it's going to happen. And you're going to be that teacher's assistant, or you're going to have that job you want. And I said, just as long as I can have that job, and so can everybody else. Because that was, like she said, that's when I put my best foot forward and said, all right, I'm going to do it for me, but I'm going to do it for everyone else as well, because it's not fair to wake up one day and not have the job you want because of something that you happened to you, not that, you were forced to do. So that's what we did. And we paved the way for a lot of girls.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, Melissa?
Mhm.
So, right, so we're gonna talk a little bit about what the process looks like, but the biggest part of doing this in almost every state is putting together the affidavit or the narrative from the survivor about what happened, which is incredibly difficult, right? We are once again putting the burden of the vast majority of the work to clear the record back on the folks who shouldn't have had it in the first place. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like having to go through that piece of it, and what would you recommend to attorneys and other advocates who are trying to work with survivors who are in the process of putting that narrative together?
Well, for you guys, and I'm just going to speak for my situation. My situation, I had to feel comfortable. So for any attorney who's approaching a survivor or trying to help a survivor, we have to feel comfortable. We have to, I don't know, feel safe enough to share, don't force us to share, because, I don't know. I would just say you need the relationship that you guys and I had. We had that respect. We just had a different relationship. I just believe that the relationship has to be there. You have to feel comfortable with who's representing you, or otherwise you're not going to open up. You're not going to, I don't know.
I will say, I think that starts with one of the first things we said, right, was that you were in complete charge, right? You got to decide. We were going to ask you questions. And if there was a question you weren't comfortable with, you got to say, I don't want to answer that. And if we were suggesting putting something in the papers that we were filing with the court, and you said, I don't really want that in there, I think that our job was to listen to you, right? We can give you our opinion, but you have to be in charge.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go through a little bit about what this process looks like and what we are seeing. Again, it really does vary state to state. I'm going to point you towards Freedom Network's website at the end, which gives you a good map that you can click on and sort of work your way around to see what the different state laws say and offer. But generally speaking, what we are talking about is we are trying to not just hide from the record, right? So your states, New Jersey's a good example, right? New Jersey has an expungement law that has nothing to do with human trafficking. It has nothing to do specifically with relief for trafficking survivors. An expungement law in New Jersey and in many other states basically says that after a certain period of time or in certain circumstances, certain records can be hidden from the public record. What trafficking specific criminal record clearing laws do, for the most part, and certainly the better laws do, is they undo those convictions. They vacate them. So it's as if they didn't happen in the first place, which has significant consequences for the things we talked about earlier, very significant consequences. The difference between those two things when we're talking about immigration concerns. there's a very big difference for folks with immigration concerns about whether or not the record was just sealed or whether the conviction was undone. And so it's basically undoing that finding of guilt. Again, every state is different, and the biggest thing that differs among state laws really is the types of convictions that are eligible. And so very, very often we have state laws that were written very specifically towards prostitution and prostitution-related offenses. New Jersey is one of them. New York is another. We see this especially in some of the earlier states that did that passed these laws, and now we're going back and trying to amend them and get better laws put on the books there. But you have to really read the law to see specifically what it says, so prostitution and prostitution-related offenses, and then what does related look like? And that's where we're trying to really push the boundaries, because we do believe that the intent of the legislatures was to serve all survivors who had criminal records as a result of their trafficking. So some best practices to think about. Oh, Martina, are you popping in because we have a question?
I'm popping in because we have a question. That's exactly right.
I saw it, but I couldn't get to it.
Yeah. So we, I just want to let everyone know that we're recording this as well. So I'm not going to use any names when I ask the questions. But the question is, ensuring that the client feels in control of the vacatur process is very important, as you've just said. But have you ever experienced needing to include information in the paperwork, even if the client doesn't want to include that? How do you proceed from there, especially if the withheld information is needed in order to get the vacatur or the relief?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my answer is, and other attorneys may disagree, but my answer is that it doesn't go in unless the client agrees that it goes in. My job is to explain why I think it's important, to go through what I think the possible consequences of including it versus not including it might be, talk about ways that we could make the person more comfortable with including it. Can we include some of the information, not all of it? But at the end of the day, I believe firmly that the client has to be comfortable with what we are putting in those papers. And so sometimes I've worked with a survivor who wasn't comfortable, and with including a piece of information that I thought it was a difficult case to begin with. And I thought, if we don't include all of this, there's virtually zero chance of success. And what we decided to do was table it for a little bit, right? The client just wasn't super comfortable with proceeding. We ultimately decided that going forward and being unsuccessful would probably do more harm than holding off. And so we waited a few months, and a few months later, the client came back and had been working with service providers, was just in a much more stable place, and said, you know what, I'm ready to go forward. And so we did that. But I don't think there is a rule that this has to be in there, and so we force the hand. That's not my take on how we do things, right? I think everything's going to be very case specific, but I'm a big believer that the client is in complete charge of how we move forward and when. Yeah.
So there's one additional question that's come in, and then we'll sort of hop back into the PowerPoint. Someone has asked how the criminal record relief laws, how they interact with trafficking legislation and immunity clauses. In other words, how do things look in terms of making sure that the convictions never happen in the first place?
Well, that's a very good question. So New Jersey's, I'll speak for New Jersey. New Jersey's vacatur law was wrapped into the broader legislation that happened, anti-trafficking legislation that happened in the state. I'm not positive I understand the question exactly, but I'm also not sure, even if I do understand it correctly, that I have the answer. I think that one of the things I feel very good about in our vacatur practice in New Jersey, and the work that the Survivor Reentry Project is doing across the country, is that I believe that every time we are working with the prosecutor's office on a vacatur, we are helping to make it less likely that a trafficking victim is convicted the next time. I don't think it's perfect, and I still think people are being arrested and convicted where they shouldn't be. But I truly believe that this is part of how we undo some of that. I think, unfortunately, the approach to trafficking in this country continues to be very law enforcement focused. It focuses a lot on prosecution in general, and until we undo that, I'm not sure that the vacatur piece can fix it completely. But I do think that we have the opportunity to educate various stakeholders, prosecutors, judges, not so much, the police tend not to be involved in this process, but I think that that's where we have the opportunity to get folks on board with changing laws and changing approaches to policing. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Feel free to follow up if I misunderstood what you were getting at there.
I think it's at it. So go on ahead, Jessica. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices now and pull some of these up here. I think, we were saying before the webinar began that as much as we've had successes in terms of changing what that map looks like and getting folks across the country trained up on how to handle these cases, I still truly believe that we are not reaching nearly enough of the people who are eligible for this relief. Melissa, I actually love it. Every once in a while, Melissa will send me an email and be like, there's someone I'm gonna send to you, or I was talking to somebody who hasn't gotten their record cleared. And I love that because we're all so busy, right? And I think it's really easy to just focus on, well, I'm at capacity and I'm busy enough. And so then you miss the piece of getting the information out to the entire community that could benefit from this relief. And I think back at that quote and I think about Melissa. Melissa's only one, unfortunately, of the clients that I have had who didn't even think about not applying for a job. And they went ahead and did it thinking, well, sure, either I was promised that this was going to be cleared, or it was so long ago that it couldn't possibly still be on my record. I was working with a woman who only just got her record cleared this past, or I guess about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago this week, actually. She had been working in a job for 15 years. Her trafficking had ended in the mid 80s. When she was up for a promotion, it did not even occur to her not to go for it. And when they said, we need to fingerprint you, she was more than happy to do it. She only had a few minor things on her record. They were all from her period of trafficking, again, which was in the 80s. And not only did she not get the promotion when the fingerprinting came back, but her employer started to harass her to such an extreme degree, having seen the fingerprinting report, that she ended up having to leave the job that she had been at for 15 years. And take a much less paying job. So these are the consequences that we have. So I think we really need to get the word out. And part of that is where all of you come in. So when you're working with a survivor, asking them about their arrest history or any interactions that they had with law enforcement during their period of trafficking can be a really good way to help identify survivors who might be eligible for this relief. I think it's important to get a sense too, if you do have a sense that there's a record, but figuring out to what extent that record has impacted their independence and their stability, because there is the possibility too. I don't ever want to make an assertion that one size fits all. And there are going to be some folks who have criminal records, but for whom the process of going through this isn't worth it. It's not impacting them. And so I think it's also a conversation about, is this something that's been negatively impacting you to the point where you want to address it? Share information about what post-conviction relief options there are in your state. And certainly, for the non-lawyers here, you can be tremendously helpful in gathering corroborating documents. A lot of times, the law does not necessarily require there to be corroboration. And so I think it's really important that when we're talking to survivors, we make it clear that very often we can proceed with just them helping to get that narrative down, to tell their story, to help paint the picture of what was going on. But when, we're lawyers, when there's documents that can help back things up, that's always helpful. I know Melissa, we went a little overboard. It was the first one we were bringing in New Jersey. And so Melissa can probably tell you that she just was sending us pages after pages of various documents that we included, which was incredibly helpful.
I got letters from friends, family, neighbors, people I worked with.
Yeah.
I got anything I could from anyone, my past probation officer. I got a pardon from President Obama.
And we had, and actually one of the things that we had from Melissa is that she had saved the letter that then U.S. Attorney Chris Christie had sent her, which
From Pat Pratt.
recognized the work that she had done in the prosecution of her trafficker and recognized that she was a trafficking survivor, which we used to create a rebuttable presumption under New Jersey's law, which was incredibly helpful. And
that
I
was
would never have
good.
even thought to ask for such a letter at the time. And Melissa had it and was able to send it to us.
Because that's what they said we had to prove, right? We had to prove first and foremost that I was being trafficked before any of the other criminal trespasses would be considered under the trafficking law, correct? Is that how that
That's
works?
right. That's right. That's a good point. Let me back up and say that real quick. Right. So what we're looking at under virtually every state law is that you have to show, one, that the person seeking relief was in fact a victim of human trafficking. Two, you have to show that there are part of their criminal record relates to that period of trafficking, is a direct result of the trafficking. I want to be really clear here and say, again, this gets very nitty gritty into the different state laws. I do not take the position that that means that the offenses always had to have occurred during the trafficking. I think that related to the trafficking has some broad possible interpretations that we sometimes need to look at. But making those connections, but if you can't show at least the fact that the person was trafficked, and that's usually where it comes straight down to the narrative. It's very, very uncommon, and we don't want to suggest that anyone needs to have documentation to prove that. If we have it, great, but it's not something that should be required. Martina, do we have another question?
Yes, if I can just jump in quickly, I wondered if Melissa could just talk about the fines and what happened to any fines that were attached to the convictions.
Oh, right, Mr. Brandel, right? I was waiting for Jessica to get finished. So I had, when I was on probation for the felony prostitution charge, I had to pay restitution to the probation department. All the monies that I paid to the probation department that they found, which I actually had receipts for all that too, showing that I paid all that money was put in check and sent back to me. Money that was still, I guess, owed for fines that I didn't know that I had accrued because I didn't ever go to court. When you're trafficked, you don't go to court. You don't ever see the judge. Whether your trafficker sends your attorney or they just don't show up or you don't show up, you just don't ever go back to court. Once you're arrested and you get out, you normally don't go back to court. Well, in my case, let me say, I didn't ever go back to court. I was told an attorney had showed up on my behalf and I didn't have to worry about it. Long story short, I did have to worry about it, obviously, because where I wound up. But the fines that I didn't pay in, the judge, I believe, had to waive those so that I didn't have to pay them, correct? Jessica, is that how that worked?
Right. So in Melissa's case,
Each case would be different, I'm thinking here, because
well, no. So in Melissa's case, what we ended up doing in Melissa's case, it's very uncommon in New Jersey. It's certainly not a part of the law for someone to have to go to court on the day of the hearing. Usually this is get done what we call on the papers. And so the person or the attorneys filing the petition on behalf of the survivor put together a pretty substantial packet of documents to the court with a copy to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office then has to decide whether or not they are going to proceed or consent, I should say, or whether or not they're going to object. One thing to keep in mind with vacatur practice that I think is very different than many other areas of a very adversarial system, especially in the criminal legal system, is that best practices is to have the attorney advocates working pretty closely with the prosecutor's offices, try and build that good relationship, right, Melissa? We did that with your case for sure.
Definitely. We had definitely had good relationship.
Yep, Danielle Buckley was the then prosecutor.
You make me cry. Every time I hear her name, I literally start to tear up, and then I can't. I love that woman. And any of the times that I've gone to court, whether it was traffic, like for your car, I mean, traffic, like parking ticket or something, or any, like even for any reason, I've never, even on TV, you don't see the prosecutor ever stand up and say, look, Your Honor, I'm not fighting this at all. Like, I want this for her. Like, you never see the prosecutor put their pen down and say, I don't have nothing to say.
It was a good day. It was a good day.
It's an amazing day.
That's not to say that you're not going to have instances where prosecutors object. Of course
That
you
was an
are.
awesome day.
But I think to the extent that we can work with prosecutors, it makes the process much better for everybody, because it's in the survivor's best interest that it be as not adversarial as we can possibly get it. But what I do want to say is, so the judge in that instance, on his own, in granting the relief, also ordered that all fines be be returned. We had not even asked for it.
And when he said it, we all looked at each
not
other.
even on our radar.
Yeah, we just looked at each other like, huh?
Yeah, so he ordered that. Since
Right.
that time, so remember that case happened in 2015. In 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case, oh, I hope I remember it, Nelson v. Colorado, I believe is the name of it,
Woo, good girl.
ordered that when convictions are overturned or vacated, that fine should be returned. And so I would argue that regardless of what state the individual state law says, that in all instances fines should be returned. And that's certainly something that we are asking for in New Jersey when we are filing these cases.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm going to go through a few more slides here. I'm going to talk about the Survivor Reentry Project, and then I want to leave more time for questions because I know that we have some more coming in. So here are some questions that can be helpful as you are talking to survivors and trying to get a sense. Oops, I went too fast. To see whether or not they have a record and whether or not pursuing relief is going to be important. The other thing I'm going to remind you is that where you are, the state you are located in is often very irrelevant to where the trafficking record is. And so I think it's important to make sure that when you're talking to survivors, you're not just focused on whatever jurisdiction you happen to be in at that time. Many survivors have records in out of state, and many survivors have records in multiple jurisdictions. We've had clients with more than 15 different states whose records need to be addressed. Unfortunately, it is a state process, and so those records have to be cleared state by state. However, there are best practices in how to do that. And one of the things that the Survivor Reentry Project tries to do is place survivors with law firms that especially where they have multiple states on their record, to try and identify law firms who practice in those various states, so that we're not reinventing the wheel each time and starting from scratch. And so that where a survivor has their affidavit, which again is the most work that gets done, is putting this affidavit together. Once we have it done once, we don't want to start from scratch again. And so we use that to build on all of the other states. So these are some questions that you can start with when you're working with a survivor to try and help determine whether or not criminal record relief is something that they can be pursuing. What the process looks like, right? We're building that narrative. The narrative that I keep talking about is really giving an example, giving a story, if you will. I don't particularly love that word, but it's the one that often gets used and comes to mind, because what we're doing is we're giving the background. We're talking about how the trafficking happened, what the trafficking looked like, and what's been happening post-trafficking. I think as this practice evolves, we as attorneys have definitely gotten better at realizing that we want to err on the side of including less than more. I think early on, we thought it was best to err on the side of including more than less, in part because we were educating folks, and in part because it was unknown terrain. But at this point, what we don't want to do is we don't want to force a survivor to give more personal information, certainly ever than they're comfortable with, but I don't want to ask them to give more information than they need to, right? At the end of the day, we are still giving this to a number of people in each, for each case. Judges are reading it, court clerks are reading it, prosecutors' offices are reading it. And so we want to be really mindful of not asking for any more than is needed, it's not an obvious fine line. You have to sort of figure it out as you go. But we also, what we don't want to do is we don't want to take someone who has, you know, a story that is especially, you know, words are failing me, but sort of stereotypical, right, trafficking narrative that folks are going to see, and make that be what the gold standard is. That if survivors who come after that don't have that exact same narrative, that same cycle, that same whatever, that they are not then eligible for relief. And so I think as we're doing these cases, we want to be thinking, of course, first and foremost about the person with whom we're working, but we also want to think about what we are doing in terms of setting up a system that is going to demand of future survivors that they have similar affidavits. And we don't want to do that. Same thing with corroboration, right? We want to think about what we can have that will help. Sometimes it's school records, right? So sometimes it's hospital records. Sometimes it's a letter from Chris Christie. There's a whole host of different things that we might be in there. It's going to be client to client. I've absolutely filed these without any corroborating evidence. So it's not necessary. And then it goes to the prosecutor. Best practice is really to send it to the prosecutor first, give them a chance to review it, and hope that they're not going to object, so that it's a smooth process. The timing of this is tricky. I would never want anyone to think, I've not heard of one state in which this is a very quick process. More often than not, it is a process that takes upwards of a year. You know, the time it takes to pull together the documents, that's one of the big variables, right? So if a client comes to me and they've already filed an affidavit in another vacatur case, or they're a foreign national client and they've already submitted an affidavit with, say, a T visa, that's going to save some time because we're going to start from there and only have to modify it slightly. If we're starting from scratch, that definitely adds to the time frame. From there, it's really about waiting on the court, right? Waiting to hear back from the prosecutor's office and waiting to hear back from the court. And in New Jersey, that process alone, once things get filed, can take anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Once we have the vacatur, it's usually another 3 to 6 months before the record has actually been completely cleared. So it's a process that definitely takes some time. And look, I could have jumped ahead. So that's generally speaking what the time frame looks like. Appearing in court, we try to avoid it whenever we can. There are some states, I know in New York, a lot of prosecutors ask to have meetings with the survivors before they agree whether or not to consent. I certainly think that's better than a formal court appearance, but in my mind, that shouldn't even be required. Trafficker does not get notified in these instances. That is not a part of it. And again, I think, right, so we are working, the money is usually a big question that comes up with attorney fees, because most of the time attorneys are filing these on behalf of survivors. And that's why we want to do pro bono wherever we can. And we're trying to build a pro bono network of attorneys who can handle this. And, you know, again, I think I want to get to the Survivor Reentry Project and how you can refer clients. But again, I think client control, if we leave you with nothing else today, I think that's the most important part of this process. I think survivors have to be in control of how and when they move forward with these. It is not our job to say this is how it has to be. It is our job to say this is what the law is, and this is what we would recommend, and you tell us what you're comfortable with, and you tell us what you're not comfortable with, and we'll see what we can do.
I think
Okay.
that's what made me feel the most comfortable, was that you guys kept saying, let me know if you're comfortable with this, and if you're not, we don't have to have it. These are the main things that we have to have. And we don't have to say it in this way. We could say it in this way, so it doesn't seem so judgmental or piercing. So
That's right. I think being problem solvers, right? It's
Yeah.
it's about saying, you tell us what you're not comfortable with, and we'll see if we can problem solve. I think that's what our job is.
there was a question about how detailed the letters should be for letters for support for clients, for case managers to survivors, how often that they're asked for letters of support. how detailed should those letters be so that they're not contradicting the statement made by the attorney or the client to attorney privilege?
That's a great question. So it's really two different things there. Sometimes they're the same, but I think the question of how detailed is really going to depend on the case. And so I think it's really important that the case manager talk to the attorney to begin with to find out what the attorney feels like they need this letter for. Right? So I've had instances in which we were concerned that the prosecutor might say it was not trafficking. That's rare. I think in New Jersey, at least, we've been pretty fortunate that we haven't had much, skepticism on the part of prosecutors in whether or not trafficking occurred. But where we have, sometimes it's important to say, hey, look, this person is getting services from a trafficking related service provider. And in that case, it might make sense to go into more detail, but we would never want detail that contradicts. And I wouldn't even want detail that is more detailed than what the affidavit is going to do. So really what it should do is it should support that. But I think the attorney is going to be able to help manage that and say, this is the kind of detail we need. And actually, this is a little bit contradictory. And so maybe we, remove that or take that out. Yeah. So the Survivor Reentry Project began at the American Bar Association under a, oh God, what grant was it? One of the federal trafficking grants in, I want to say 2016. And it's a training and technical assistance program. That funding ended and we've now merged over to Freedom Network. But the idea since 2016 has really been to build a network of attorneys who are working on criminal record clearing across the country so that we can do warm handoffs and so that we can have teams working together so that survivors who do have multi-jurisdictional records do not have to get sort of piecemeal, go to California, then come back to New Jersey, then we'll go to New York. We want people working together so that it's as seamless as possible. And so that, I just told you, the timing is not great, right? These things take a long time. So imagine how much time we can save if the team working on a New Jersey filing is working concurrently to the team working in California and Kansas, rather than waiting for each one to do. There are a few states that have timing requirements that you may have to work around, right? I believe Florida's rule is still that you can't have any other pending applications out there. But again, this is why the more there's communication across the entire team, figuring out what needs to get done and what the timing should be, we can avoid any unnecessary delays. And so what we offer with the Survivor Reentry Project is we will offer technical assistance to anyone who's doing work on this issues. If you're an attorney who's getting started, you want to get involved. If you're a service provider trying to figure out how to connect clients with services, we offer trainings, we offer one-on-one assistance. But what we've been really gearing up, especially over the past year, is this ability for clients to have to come to us for direct inquiries. The Survivor Reentry Project itself is not handling cases one-on-one, but what we are doing is we are referring those cases out. And so we've put together a team of law firms across the country. We have 6 law firms who rotate, and twice a year they are on call. And so whatever law firm is on call for that month, they handle the screening. They work with the survivor to get fingerprinting, which can be cost prohibitive for many survivors. And so the law firms have generously agreed to take on the fingerprinting piece of this. And then they take the fingerprinting record and work with the survivor and work with the consultants at Survivor Reentry Project to help determine what the best legal game plan is. If you go onto Freedom Network USA's website and go to the Survivor Reentry Project, you will see that there's a place for survivors to ask for technical assistance. That's where they're going to be connected directly to the law firm, or you can come in and ask for that assistance on behalf of someone. And so there's 2 different ways to access that relief. Amanda, who you met earlier, is usually the first point of contact that you'll hear back from. But so what happens is the survivor fills this out. It goes to Amanda. Amanda will do a brief screen to make sure we have all of the necessary information, and then we send them to whichever law firm is on there. If the law firm determines that they are eligible and it's something that they can handle because their firm is in the correct state for where the record is, a lot of times they'll take the case directly. And if not, we try to place the survivor with another pro bono attorney. Again, we are trying to figure out wherever possible how to avoid the survivor having to pay for representation in these cases. I think with that, this is what the form looks like. There we go. I forgot I had this here. And so this is what a request for assistance will look like, asking very basic information. Again, sometimes Amanda will follow up and ask for some additional information. And with that, I'm going to leave the last few minutes for Q&A.
That was excellent, Jessica and Melissa. Thank you so much. There's a question about how to determine which states have laws. Is there a place where people can go to find the laws for all 50 states? And
So
which states have the best laws?
I don't know that I'm going to get into the which states have the best best laws. I think that could be tricky. But
Are you talking about the question from the anonymous attendee? Will you be commenting on survivors who have criminal records in multiple states? Is that the one? And how to best suggest connecting the survivor with trauma-informed lawyers? Is that the one?
This is a different one because I think Jessica answered that one.
Yeah, she answered that one.
Network. So this one is more.
so can you see this, or do I need to change how I'm sharing? Can you see the map on my screen?
You need to change your screen.
No, it says Q&A still.
Okay, hang on one second.
Yeah, I'm confused as a question, so I'm trying to find it.
Okay. Okay, so if you go onto Freedom Network's website, it's freedomnetworkusa.org. You can go to the Survivor Reentry Project page on here. We can put that in the, Amanda, if you're still here, can you throw that up in the chat so that folks have that link? And then you can go to the different states. And so if you go to New Jersey, it will tell you what the statute is in New Jersey. And so that's how you can learn what the laws are. The coloring on the map, the shading in, gives you a sense of when there's criminal record relief available. To some extent, it looks different here than on the map I showed. It's a little bit more clear on the first one I showed, because, for example, Texas doesn't have full-on relief, but it has some. Others have relief specifically for juveniles. But starting at Freedom Network's website is going to be your best bet to getting a state-by-state list. You can also do it this way, and it'll give you a list of the different states. In terms of which states have the best, I feel like if Kate Mogilescu were here, she would have a much clearer answer. I'm going to say Nebraska has one of the better ones. Florida has a good law, a beautiful preamble to their law, which I think really lays out all of the issues that we want to be considered. But I think we still have work to do, right? I still think a lot of this still focuses a lot around sex trafficking, and does not offer good concrete relief in most states to labor trafficking survivors because of the focus on prostitution. I think even for sex trafficking survivors, as Melissa said, many have records that have to do with trespassing, burglary, shoplifting, all sorts of things that are not specifically prostitution, and yet were very, very directly related to the trafficking. So more work to be done, but we've made great strides for sure.
Absolutely,
Another-
absolutely.
Another question that has come in, do survivors have to pay the court costs, or can the attorneys cover the court costs?
There usually aren't court costs. And so, for example, in New Jersey, there is no filing fee for this, but for when we are connecting you with pro bono firms, almost always the pro bono firms are going to cover those costs. And really best practices in working with, for pro bono attorneys working with survivors, or right for legal services attorneys working with survivors, anyone, is if it's not going to be a cost that is going to be covered, that's something that should be discussed right in the beginning. These are the anticipated costs, but our hope and experience with the pro bono firms that we've been working with is that they will cover the costs.
And Jessica, another question, how can attorneys who are interested in doing this work pro bono, how can they get involved?
Oh, please go back to our technical assistance. I know it says technical assistance, but that's a great way. If you want to get in touch, click that here, and then that give us your contact information, and we will get in touch with you. Make
And-
sure we know what state you're in.
Another question has come in about difficulties with the IRS. What if the issues, the legal issues that a survivor is facing relate to the IRS?
Oh, that's a new one. I
So
don't know that I.
So I can actually answer it
Great.
because I
Great.
don't think, Jessica, if I'm understanding correctly, there's no federal criminal records.
That's very, I should have said that from the very beginning. There is no federal vacatur law or criminal record clearing law for survivors. Senator Gillibrand had, I believe, proposed one years ago. It has gone nowhere. I don't know with the new administration how likely we are to see that moved forward. It is a very real concern for survivors. We do have a number of survivors who have federal convictions that right now nothing can get done with. My answer, though, is I would not move forward with state convictions because if and when we are able to get a federal law on the books, better to have everything else cleared and have that be the last barrier.
So the last thing I'll add on that is we've actually done a fact sheet on the intersection between human trafficking and federal taxes, which is essentially looking at exactly the question that this particular participant has asked. So we'll send that around in the materials, and you can also find it on our website. And there are tax clinics all around the country that can help trafficking survivors who have problems with the IRS. So it is 1 o'clock and it is time to wrap up. But I really want to thank both Jessica Kitson and Melissa Smith for an excellent presentation. And Melissa, I particularly want to thank you for being such a pioneer in this area and for the courage that you showed in really blazing a trail for all of the survivors across the United States who will come and follow in the precedents that you've set. So thank you both. And thank you everyone who's participated. We will send out the recording of this webinar so that people can learn whether or not they were able to attend. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Melissa.
Bye, guys. Have fun.